So I think we have a lot of momentum here. Welcome everyone. My name is Dominique Tan. Welcome to Boxed Out, who really pays for next day shipping. This event's hosted by the Liberty Hill Foundation's Environment and Justice Donor Circle. I'm one of this year's co-chairs for the Environment and Justice Donor Circle, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a bit. But first, wanted to give all of the acknowledgement to make this event happen. Tons of hands have touched this to make this a very eventful and educational webinar. On the Liberty Hill staff side, Angelo, Sonia, Shelley, Diego, Andres, and the communications team. And then, of course, the Environment and Justice Donor Circle Steering and Planning Committee members, Jane, Julia, Miriam, Daniel, John, Paula, and Adam. As we begin, we want to acknowledge and honor that there are over 200 tribal nations that are fighting for recognition in this region that we call California. Today, we're going to focus on the ancestral lands of some of those native tribes, including the Tongva, Serrano, Cahuilla, Shoshone nations, in what is commonly known as the Inland Empire. We'll dig into the issues faced by communities and workers of these lands, as well as their fight for environmental and economic justice. But before I head into the programming, I wanted to introduce Liberty Hill Foundation and the Donor Circle in case there's anyone who's actually attending the event for the very first time. So Liberty Hill Foundation is a place-based foundation that really seeks to advance social justice in Los Angeles. They have tons of things that they do, including an amazing grant-making program where they fund grassroots groups working on critical issues along the lines of gender justice, economic and housing justice, and environmental justice. And in addition to all this amazing programming, they also have donor engagement programming to engage donor activists in the work through donor circles. The Environment and Justice Giving Circle is one of those donor communities. So we're a group of individuals who really care about advancing environment and justice issues in LA. And every year we pool our money to be able to grant out to groups working on these issues. Last year, we had 34 members and we raised $200,000 that we gave out to a little over a dozen groups. And it's all unrestricted general operating support. So it provides this amount of additional support for groups that are doing amazing work on the ground. This year, we also have been building up our educational programming for our donor members around priority issues. And this year's priority issues are a continuation of last year's. There are three of them, the first of which is to continue funding the work to stop oil drilling in Los Angeles. The second is to advance environmental justice for Native American Indians in Los Angeles. And the last one is to promote healthy built environments, of which this is one, really focusing on a new area of growth, which is in the Inland Empire and around the issue of warehousing and logistics. So I'll hand it over to Julia and Angelo now, who will introduce our speakers for today's discussion. Julia is a fellow EJ Donor Circle steering committee member, and she's really one of the brainchilds of this event, really pushed to make this happen. And Angelo Logan is a longtime EJ organizer. He's also White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council member and Liberty Hill's new-ish senior director on environmental and climate justice. So Julia and Angelo.
Thank you, Dominic. Hey everyone, again, Angelo Logan, Senior Director of Environmental and Climate Justice with the Liberty Hill Foundation. I'm just so excited to bring so many amazing folks into this space to share with you the importance of the work that's happening in Riverside and San Bernardino, specifically related to warehousing. I wanted to just provide a quick overview, background on why we thought this is really important to bring forward. So over 5 million people in Riverside and San Bernardino counties live within 27,000 square miles. And over the last 2 decades, this region has experienced a transformation from farmlands and open space to the home of the largest concentration of distribution warehouses in the country. Mega warehouses operated to serve Amazon, Walmart, Target, and hundreds of other companies, bringing a changing landscape to the inland region. And with e-commerce on the rise, so is expected the rise of warehouses in the inland region. As an example, or kind of just some quick data, in 1980, Riverside and San Bernardino had about 62 warehouses. And in 2020, the region had 1,300 warehouses. And these are not just small warehouses, these are mega warehouses. And with that came thousands of diesel trucks and hundreds of polluting trains to the region, bringing an enormous amount of toxic pollution and climate pollution. So environmental racism and the climate crisis is not only a threat to the inland communities and workforce, but it's a reality. And today we're going to hear from some of the experts in frontline communities that can really demonstrate and share their stories with you to really put a fine point on the importance of paying attention to this issue. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Julia.
Thanks, Angelo. And thanks everyone for joining us here on this call. After we did our ports tour, it seemed important to connect where goods are coming into the port to where they end up, because those things are intimately connected, although there's two different landscapes, and so we often don't see it and don't make that connection. But really, you can't have one without the other. And where goods are ending up, mostly in the Inland Empire here, that landscape has changed drastically, as Angelo mentioned, and communities and families and people who live there are being dramatically affected. There's these great people who are joining us and organizations that they work with who are, struggling and fighting to have a more just and more healthy environments in those places. And as part of the Environmental Justice Steering Committee, of which I'm a member, we wanted to introduce those people to everyone so you can be aware of these organizations and think about funding them and hear what their perspectives are. We also have a list of readings and resources that we have pulled together, which will be emailed to everyone after this conversation, so you can read more. So today we have 4 guests who are going to speak to these issues, and each speaker will talk for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for questions. To introduce people, we have Andrea Vidaurre, co-founder and policy analyst at the People's Collective for Environmental Justice. She'll speak first. Then we have Liz Senna, who is the operation manager for the Center for Community Action and Environmental Justice. Next, we will hear from Adrian Martinez, who's the deputy managing attorney at Earthjustice. And then finally, we'll hear from Sheheryard Kaoosji, executive director of the Warehouse Worker Resource Center. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm going to hand it over to Andrea first. Thank you, Andrea.
Hi, everybody. Let me see if I can share my screen real quick. Can you guys see this? Yeah, okay. I just thought maybe it'd be helpful to have some visuals in the background while I'm talking, because a lot of folks haven't really been to the Inland Empire, and so sometimes you don't really know what it looks like. And so there's some images in the back that we captured when we were doing this project with PBS. But yeah, my name is Andrea Vidaurre. I use she, her pronouns. I am with an organization called the People's Collective for Environmental Justice. We're a community-based organization. We're a collective. We have a horizontal structure. We're a worker-run nonprofit that started about 3 years ago. We're actually going to have our 3rd-year anniversary this Friday, when we're going to celebrate it as a fundraiser. But a lot of the members of People's Collective have been doing environmental justice work in the Inland Empire for a really long time. And it's for because all of us live, work, and just have people that we love that live in the Inland Empire. A lot of us that we're drawn to do this work, I think, don't see it as an option to not be involved, to not do something about it, or to not care, because this is where we live, this is where we work, this is where our friends and family work and live. And, you know, living on the front lines, like we really have no choice but to do something about it. In the personal, I got involved when I was in, after college. And I started just connecting the dots about how, oh yeah, I guess I do live right next to a truck route, or I guess I do live in a community where things are really changing. My parents would take me to another school district because they thought it would be better. And I was like, oh, they have sidewalks there and they don't have as many trucks. And, you know, all these kind of things started connecting the dots. And I think for me, what really changed me in doing something is I was working in the city of Montana, and the city was really starting to do these massive rezonings of the communities. And so where my high school was going to be, they had a plan to put in all these warehouses in the future. And so that's where it kind of started, right? But yeah, and I think a lot of us that got into this work do it because there was a project that was put behind our house, or because there was or because our friends or parents like myself, my parents work in the warehousing industry, and I know that they are the front lines. They work 8 to 10 hours a day in front of diesel trucks, unloading and loading warehouses, and then they come home to that. So yeah, our organization is, you know, our mission is to you know, fight against environmental racism. We specifically call it out, right? How do we fight environmental racism and white supremacy that shows up like the goods movement in our communities? At the same time that we're, you know, fighting against environmental racism, I think we're also fighting for the alternatives we want to see in our communities, right? Like that's our way of saying, this is the self-determination in our communities. This is what we want to see. And so I would say our work is half and half. We try to do it half and half, but half of our work is like fighting off these projects, you know, and bad things that are coming to our communities, and fighting for regulations that hold these industries accountable. But then the other half of our work, I think, is to implement programming and different projects that the community wants to see as a way of being able to have an alternative that we want. And I can talk a little bit about that later. But yeah, I know one of the big things I just wanted to express during my time here is how important it is to think about warehousing and the goods movement as it connects to climate change. I think we think a lot about extraction of oil and gas as what climate change is, but I think sometimes we tend to forget that the combustion of gas and oil is also these fossil fuels, and actually is a big part of what drives the need for fossil fuels. And so in our communities, we have like over 500,000 trucks, diesel trucks that are driving in and out of our communities. And I'm talking right behind people's homes at some point, right? We're talking about 50 feet, 100 feet behind people's homes. And they're exposed to it every single day. And it's really normal to hear folks that are connected to air machines, like oxygen machines, that need air filtration running in their house to be able to not use as much medication as they need to for their allergies. It's really normal to hear about how our communities need to be spending a lot of money on asthma medication, and even further down, like cancers, right? I mean, cancer is taken folks from our communities as well. And so this is all like a climate consequence, and thinking about the layers on how climate change makes everything worse. When we talk about the blackouts and we talk about who's experiencing those because of, you know, all the energy usage that is going to these warehouses, our neighborhoods are the ones that get shut off first, right? It's not the warehouses that get shut off, it's ours. And so when they're shut off, what happens to the oxygen machine? What happens to the air filters? What happens to all the things that we use to mitigate the impacts that we feel? So there is like a intrinsic connection between climate change and warehousing that is so important. And that's not even without talking about just the urban heat that's created from the billion square feet of warehousing that we now have in the community. So just to maybe leave it on a more positive note, some of the work that we're working on is, you know, working with some of our partners here online and working on campaigns to stop these developments from happening right behind our homes. We have campaigns on how to raise the standards of these warehouses that come in, making sure that they come in with community benefits agreements and other types of high standards and electrification. And specifically, I'll talk about in the city of Colton, where we're working in, community members were able to win a warehouse moratorium for 2 whole years, right? They were able to get the city to completely say we're putting a pause on warehousing. And this resulted in a policy in the city that actually basically like rezoned certain areas. So now warehousing can't go into there. The problem is the city of Colton is so inundated with industry already that this policy maybe came a little too late. So now the work is about how do we engage our community in to making sure that we're able to regenerate and restore the community. So a beautiful program was born out of there called The Air I Breathe, which is a community-run program about which puts these personal air monitors on middle school and high schoolers, and they track their own air quality in their high school, and they're coming up with a plan on what they want to see in their schools to better the environment that they live in. Because specifically in one of the schools that the kids monitor, it's right next to a freight freeway, which is right next to a rail yard, which then has warehouses next to it. And that is what's so important about, I think, doing this kind of work, that it is a system change, because we are going after an entire system. Warehouses wouldn't exist without the ports, without the rail yards, without trains and air freight, and et cetera. And this specific work, I think, given that transportation is the largest emissions in climate change in the US, is like so important to do. If we're thinking about climate change, we have to tackle this transportation system. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you. And I think I'll pass it, right? Should I pass it?
Yes, please, Andrea.
Let me pass it to Liz.
Okay, hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Andrea, for that amazing piece of information on all the work that you guys are doing over there. And so, yes, my name is Elizabeth Senna. I go by Liz. I'm the operations manager over at the Center for Community Action and Environmental Justice, or CCAEJ for short. And essentially, we're really trying to bring about change when we talk about EJ. And I mean, there's a multitude of ways to do this, but you know, one of the ways that we do this is by essentially trying to dismantle the root causes of EJ. And so, to give you a little bit of background, I actually didn't enter this space until about 3 years ago. I have a nursing background, which during my rotations, I had a special focus on public health. I actually did my rotation out in the city of Watts, and that was my first exposure to community. And I came back to my own community in the city of Fontana, trying to you know, see what opportunities were here. And unfortunately, there really aren't. And so anyway, I continued my pursuit. You know, then of course COVID hit, so I still worked at the hospital during COVID, and there was a moment where I was heavily impacted by what was going on with COVID, and so I kind of took a step away from there. And anyway, I started to pay attention to my own community. And I started realizing that there were, every week, it seemed like there was a new warehouse that was just being built. So I started to pay attention, like, why is this happening? And at that time, a couple of our community members, we started organizing on Facebook, and we started having conversations like, why is this happening? How is it happening? And we really got an understanding of civic engagement and what that really meant. And the what the political landscape looked like, what the land use was essentially covering. And so we realized that our planning commission has a lot to do with the decisions that are being made, as do the city council members. And then I remember calling like attorneys and just kind of asking them like, hey, this is going on, how can I stop this? And I remember him telling me like, you just have to get a lot of people involved. And I'm like, okay. So we started organizing, and this is just like people, like regular people, neighbors. And I was like, you guys have to attend this city council meeting or planning commission meeting. And first meeting, we got like 50 people to go. Then we got 60 people to go. Then it was just increasing every single time. And I made friends with an attorney, and then when they passed one of the warehouse that was going to be built next to the high school, he's like, you have to appeal it. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, you as a resident have the right to appeal it. Things I didn't even know. So I'm like, okay. We did a GoFundMe. We raised $300 and we appealed it. And that is what caught the California Attorney General's attention, that these frontline communities have basically had enough of the environmental racism that was going on. And so it was at that moment that I didn't even know who CCAJ was. I think I even chopped up the letters a couple of times. I mispronounced it. But it was them who showed up every single time, who offered help. And they were always like, well, how can I help you? And honestly, at that point, I thought, you know what? Oh, great. This organization is going to come and help me and they're going to do the work, right? No, it's really not like that, because every community is different and they're there to support, right? And that's and so fast forward, there was an opportunity for me to come and help because my plan was just to stay at home and raise my two little ones. They were 3 and 4 at the time, and I was just going to stay at home. But there was an opportunity for me to come and work with CCAJ, and so I hopped on board, and I very quickly started learning, like, what is EJ? What is environmental justice? And I am very fortunate to have an amazing director leading our organization, because she basically broke it down to me. Like, what is EJ? It's basically, because a lot of people think it's just like recycling and trees, and it's so much more than that. It is everything that is your natural environment around you, your built environment, the things that are built, and the social environment. And they're all connected one way or another. And so here I am now, having the privilege to have been able to essentially advocate. I went from advocating from just one patient at a bedside to now advocating for communities and entire regions. And it's amazing because there is so much injustice that is happening, unfortunately. And, it doesn't just stop at zip codes, because what is happening here in our particular zip code, some way it's affecting another zip code somewhere else. And so at CCAJ, we basically try to build a community, and we try to do it with a lot of hope, because I will be honest, there's a lot of things that are happening to our frontline communities that make you just want to lose hope. And so the impacts of the warehouses around us, we're seeing it on a daily basis. The number of daily truck trips that come to our area, it's a lot. It has a very big impact on the traffic. And now you're seeing people get desperate in traffic and take red lights, whether that's a truck or whether that's, regular people just trying to get to work. And what's upsetting is that there's this false narrative that these warehouses are bringing us jobs. Well, sure, they could be bringing us jobs, but they're not bringing us jobs that offer livable wages, that have benefits. And so it makes it very, very difficult to really want to work at those places. And so it's been very sad to see that the communities in our region have essentially been taken advantage of. And we took a step back last year and we really tried to analyze like what is going on and how can we fix it. And everything comes down to education. But it's challenging because most people, they have to work 2 to 3 jobs in order to put food on the table, in order to sustain their own families. So how do you educate these people, the communities at once? How do you provide all of this information that they need to know if they have no knowledge of it? And so one of the ways that we started doing that is essentially by creating an ambassador program that really breaks down what EJ is. We talk about green zones, we talk about climate change, resiliency, sustainability, and transitioning into cleaner energy. And so, yeah, it's EJ covers a lot of things, and there's a lot of communities that we still need to essentially educate, and we're able to do that through our ambassador program that we have going on. But so we'll talk about more about that in a minute, and I will go ahead and pass it over to Adrian.
Thank you, Liz.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Liz. And thank you, Andrea. Hi, my name is Adrian Martinez, and I'm a deputy managing attorney for Earthjustice. We're a nonprofit environmental law firm that provides legal resources to, I think we have about 1,000 clients across the nation. We're in 14 offices across the nation, and one of our offices is Los Angeles. We've been here about 10 years, or just a little over 10 years. And really one of our big places of focus has been addressing the air pollution crisis in Los Angeles region as one of the most polluted regions of the country, and for many pollutants, kind of the most polluted region. We've had the pleasure to work with a lot of the groups fighting pollution in the Inland Empire. We work with groups across the region on a range of issues. Something I'll just note up front is that I really appreciate about folks fighting in the Inland Empire is, it's I don't know if this is the right word, but it's a small but mighty crew. They're trying to go to war, with this industry with relatively limited resources. But I think one of the things I've always been impressed is every staff member at the organizations is really effective at what they do, effective at using their time. We'll be working on one thing, and that staffer is working with communities on another thing. It's really kind of impressive, the scope of what Inland Empire advocates are doing. And then the other kind of key point that was raised is, I think there's been an awareness, thanks to many of our key thought leaders on addressing the freight pollution crisis, like Angelo and others, to really connect the port advocates in LA with the Inland Empire, because of this system. The only way we're gonna succeed is if we can achieve success at both ends. But one of the things is early on I started getting approached about a warehouse here and there. Hey, there's this warehouse project, you're a lawyer, can we fight this? And so we started taking on some of those cases. The thing that was a little overwhelming was the volume. And one thing is, in the last, I've probably been working on warehouse cases since 2010, 2011. It was, a handful of cases back in 2010, 2011. And then now you're seeing just a tidal wave of warehousing. And so part of the thing that is the difficulty is you've got folks working in the Inland Empire trying to stem off the tide of new warehousing and the kind of just siting of it wherever this industry feels it can and should site, they will. You know, at the beginning of the documentary, there's a drone footage of a warehouse right behind a house. And, you know, when we're saying this is literally people's backyards, I mean, we're talking 15, 20, 50 feet from people's backyards. And it's hard to conceptualize what that looks like until you see it. And it's just an overwhelming, lack of foresight from urban planners, an overwhelming amount of capture of city government and regional government that's taking place out there. And so that's why you need groups like CCAJ, PC4AJ, and WWRC to kind of really push back against this really powerful industry. You know, so we were challenging a lot of the warehouses. And one of the things that I think, you know, one of the great success stories from an environmental justice standpoint nationally was the work of Inland Empire groups to get a policy in place to address the existing warehouses in the South Coast warehouse rule. About 2018 or so, there was some notion like we needed something more systemic. It was hard to fight every one of these warehouses in litigation because, you know, my colleagues who are lawyers were good, but, you know, you can only fight so much. And then also our laws are set up not to say that local governments need to make a good decision. They just need to disclose the parade of horribles that will result from their decisions. You know, as long as they can articulate that and disclose that, they can make bad decisions. And so you know, even though we could stop litigation, you might be able to stop some warehouse temporarily, it does pose problems because eventually they can just keep building it, and it is a persistent industry. And so, but, you know, back to the rule, we were able to compel our local government to adopt a first of its kind regulation to address warehouse pollution. And it works as, you know, warehouses have points that they need to achieve, and they can achieve them by installing solar panels, using zero emission trucks, having zero emission yard trucks at their terminal, and a range of other mechanisms, or they could pay a fee. And so one of the interesting things is, you know, I was talking in a recent webinar about this, and the reason, you know, we need to, you know, work in the Inland Empire and support our folks on the ground working there is, you know, there is a double standard with the industry. The industry can make all sorts of wild claims. So during the warehouse ISR, you know, we heard the sky is going to fall, warehouses are going to go everywhere else, there's not going to be any more warehouses in the region, and, you know, this parade of horribles that were going to happen if our local air regulators regulated this industry. And, you know, when we were looking at the data, because, you know, the double standard is that on the environmental side, you can't engage in hyperbole. You've got to really articulate what the facts are. And so, you know, one of the great things we had is we worked together to present a coherent case on the air pollution crisis and provide, you know, the compelling argument on why this needs to be done. And so we were able to get the rule passed. And I think a lot of credit really goes to People's Collective for Environmental Justice, Center for Community Action, Environmental Justice, other groups in LA County like East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice and Sierra Club that really fought so tirelessly against, you know, hundreds of people in the industry who were opposing us at every turn. And then the other kind of nice thing to keep in mind is the good thing about our friends out in the Inland Empire is, you know, when the government does something good, like pass the warehouse rule, and the industry sues in court to overturn this life-saving regulation, a lot of times what you're seeing is groups try to participate to defend it. And so some groups have hopped into the litigation to, you know, really spar with the trucking industry and the other industries that have sued over it. But it is one, I think, a really great success story. There's lots more work that needs to be done. It's not the silver bullet, but I think what was great and what I appreciate about my colleagues in the Inland Empire is the creativity, the policy, knowledge, the great connections they have to decision makers at AQMD, and built up that network to get this rule passed that was really hard. But yeah, that's just a little bit about the work. I mean, I think one of the things about the freight and logistics industry, I think that goes understated, is that San Bernardino has the worst ozone pollution in the country.
Sure.
And so pretty much every day it's unsafe for a kid to go out and breathe during the summer. So really for most of the day they shouldn't be out playing soccer or football or basketball or whatever sport, or going to the park. And unless we can really tame this industry, which means getting them to zero emissions, we're going to continue to allow San Bernardino to breathe filthy air. And so I think the work, we've got a decade or so or more to really hone in and get this work done. But I think the work's really important, and you've got some great groups out there doing it, but I'm sure they could use more resources and support for their work. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. Sheheryard?
Thanks. And thank you for having me on this panel. My name is Sheheryard. I'm the executive director of an organization called the Warehouse Worker Resource Center. We're an organization focused on improving working conditions in the warehouse sector across the Inland Empire, as well as in the LA County. And our focus is explicitly on really improving conditions through what we call education, advocacy, and action. So we bring workers together in non-union workplaces to improve their conditions, sometimes around wage theft or addressing issues of heat and issues of health and safety, discrimination, all the different kinds of things that we see in these workplaces. But we really bring together people across the region, across the community. Warehousing affects workers in these warehouses. Well over 200,000 people in the Inland Empire alone work in these warehouses, but it affects everybody across the region. All 4.5 million people in the region, millions of people in LA County as well. When we started organizing in the area a little over 10 years ago, the narrative around working conditions in the warehouse industry was, we either have jobs or you have environmental protections. You can't have both. And that was really kind of the dynamic that we've been trying to overcome. I think have done, along with a lot of the folks on this call, to overcome in the last few years, is that we can't have jobs against the environment. That's just, setting us up to fail. We know that people in the warehouses have to breathe air. We know that people in the community have to have jobs. And these jobs are here whether we like it or not. So it's on us to make sure that these facilities have good working conditions, but not isolate that away from the broader environmental impacts that are here locally and globally. So as you might have heard, there's a huge amount of goods movement coming into Southern California. Over 40% of the goods that enter the United States on import come in through the ports of LA and Long Beach, and a huge amount of it comes to the Inland Empire. And that's not an accident, right? That was part of a strategy by the Southern California Association of Governments and other groups to say, we're going to move all this polluting and destructive development into an area where we're not going to get as much resistance. We don't have as many unions out here. We don't have maybe as much organized environmental movement. And they were able to really build out a system, again, not accidentally, but very intentionally, in a place with a lot of vulnerable people. And they looked for an opportunity to find more ways to push costs down, which means more ways to make people's working lives more difficult, and to externalize those costs, which means to make people's lives, in terms of air quality, in terms of pollution and other issues, that's a problem for the community. It's no longer a problem for the company. And our job as a movement is to come together and reverse that, right? And say, you're going to at least internalize their own costs, if not more. You're going to pay your way and pay their costs that you're imposing on our communities through 25-year-old injured workers, right? Workers who are working at a really high quota in an Amazon warehouse, for instance, running to make sure you get your 2-day shipping, getting injured, getting their back injured, getting permanently disabled. And like, oh, we'll give you $25,000 for your workers' comp injury for the rest of your life. You'll never be able to work. That's the kind of cases that we're coming across on almost a daily basis, coming out of Amazon's, Walmart's, those kind of corporations. And the key thing for us is that these are companies that, you know, obviously are the biggest companies in the world. These are companies that can afford to do the right thing. And at the same time, they won't do it unless compelled to. So we're organizing in the workplace, organizing in the community to compel these companies to actually at least pay their fair share. That's the least we can ask. We actually want more. But we know we're up against very, very big, powerful corporations. So we're trying to at least create systems to do that. And our strategy as Warehouse Worker Resource Center is to, again, bring workers together in some of the biggest companies in the world. We did a lot of work in Walmart for a long time. We were able to change the conditions to where they were no longer using staffing agencies, no longer paying piece rate, bring workers on direct. It's not as good as it could be. These workers don't have a union, but it's better than it was, because when we pick on and focus on some of the big companies with big brands, they're actually, you know, easier to shame, easier to force. And when you get them to change their practices, you can change the practices in a few dozen facilities instead of just one. That's our strategy at Amazon now, being that's obviously the big dog in the goods movement, is trying to focus on some big facilities. There's one in San Bernardino, an air freight facility where we're building power with workers, again, to address issues of health and safety, address issues of wage theft and wages, but also to address the fact that these facilities have a huge impact on very, very vulnerable communities. And in partnership with organizations like environmental justice organizations, community organizations, labor unions, building power to address the system, right? We can fight one warehouse at a time, but what we really need to do is address the fact that this system is here. We need to raise standards across the system, and the fact that we're just one part of a global system, right? And so building solidarity with other people around the country who are doing this work, building solidarity around the world. So we know we're up against a lot. At the same time, you know, again, like what we're really focused on is not allowing ourselves to be split and pitted against each other. You know, we've brought labor unions to the table to really stand with environmental justice partners and not sell each other out. That's a really key part of this, right? Is we have to center workers in communities who are impacted and make sure that they understand the commonalities and aren't pitted against each other. We've been organizing specifically in San Bernardino for a community benefits agreement, which would be the first community benefits agreement in the region, which would, again, not just win worker conditions and better jobs, but also environmental protections, also housing protections. A lot of the workers, we're organizing is in a community where housing is being torn out to build warehousing, right? Exactly what you don't need in the midst of a rising housing crisis in our region, but that's what we're seeing. And so we're organizing communities along with groups like Peace Edge to address that directly and say we want the city of San Bernardino, we want the region to be accountable for the way this stuff gets built. And every time we do that, we hope to be able to raise standards. So that's kind of, you know, the small scale and the big scale all together. We know we have to keep both in mind. At the same time, the main thing is, you know, building power among our communities and making sure that they're given a voice in this organizing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for speaking. We are at the Q&A portion of this talk. I see Dominique has put a question into the chat. There's been mention of warehousing moratoriums and warehousing jobs not being the ideal type of job. What are some of the job alternatives to warehousing that your groups are advocating for, and how has that messaging been received by local governments? Does anyone want to take that on?
Yeah, I'll start. Oh no, sorry, Liz has her hand raised, so go ahead, Liz. Sorry.
Okay, so one of the alternatives and something that we always advocate for when we go to city council meetings is, we always advocate for solar. A lot of the warehouses, obviously, they're soaking up large spaces of land, and so a lot of the warehouses developers end up only making the warehouses solar ready, but they don't install solar. And so a lot of times we try to highlight, trade jobs that would essentially help with the maintenance of solar being not only placed in there, but also it being maintained. And so, yeah, I mean, even with electricians, being able to install and maintain those solar. So there's a lot of trades. That's also something that could be asked for in a community benefit agreement as well. Is for funding to be provided by the developers in order to establish more trade-based jobs in the area. So that's one option. I'm sure there's more.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to get the other folks on the panel weighing in because they know a lot about this issue. But one of the big thinkers in the region is an economist named Dr. John Using. And as much as he is an economist, he is someone who is one of the biggest freight industry enthusiasts I've ever seen. And he's been pretty honest about the effort to kind of create almost like a, I don't know, I think in agriculture they call it monoculture or whatever, where it's just one industry. And I think one of the things you do when you just are so focused on one industry is you become susceptible to disruptions. What if Southern California shifts from a freight hub, then your whole region could collapse. And so I think one of the things that is, I think, an interesting part of the debate, it's not like folks are necessarily saying get rid of all the warehouse jobs. It's just saying there's just a ton of them here. But the other kind of thing to keep in mind is this is an industry, I think, that's heavily mechanized. And it's moving more and more that way. And so from a job, I mean, I don't know if tons of people think, but jobs per square foot on some of these facilities, these are massive space hogging facilities, and they're relatively few jobs, and it's becoming fewer and fewer within more modern buildings. So it's actually not this kind of job gold rush that they're claiming. There obviously are some construction jobs and other things like that, but the newer modern warehouse is it's becoming more of a robot kind of situation as opposed to workers. So, I mean, I think there's probably lots of industries that could be pursued, but I think the problem is you can't even have that discussion given the intense capture that the freight industry has throughout the region. But I'm sure others have thoughts on this too.
I mean, I'd like to think we've moved the needle a little bit on that, Adrian, just the last few years. I feel like the moratoriums are an example of people kind of addressing what they can through local power. And that's, manifested. There's a lot of different efforts for moratoria around the region because people are just frustrated. They were promised good jobs. They've seen over the last decade that that's not panned out. And people are mad. They don't know how to, they don't have a direct connection to power. So they're trying to kind of address it. I'd say like there's conversations that have changed. I think even some of the people who used to be boosters are saying, okay, we need diversification, right? Maybe we shouldn't just do warehousing. I think that is to, the credit of this movement. And the conversations, like there's a lot of different ways it could go. I think diversification is the main conversation, but one thing that we've been part of to note is to kind of lean into the fact that it's a freight hub and it's trillions of dollars literally worth of investment over the last 30 years into that system. It's not going anywhere. Is what do we do to accelerate the transition to zero emission, knowing how critical that is for everyone? So we, along with the Labor Council and the Teamsters and other partners, are working on this project called Plug-in IE to transition goods movement in, as quickly as possible, especially in the workforce development side, train our community members and our workers to be able to work on zero emission freight equipment and vehicles, hoping that can be part of not just transitioning, but transitioning in good jobs with, union contracts, that kind of thing, because we know that that's going to be a key part of the transition, and those jobs don't tend to go to our people. They tend to go to some MBA from Ohio, right? So we really want to make sure that if those jobs are contracting, which it might be, at least those mechanization, especially clean jobs, become things that go to people in this community and also have decent working conditions.
Thank you. Andrea, do you want to respond to that question at all?
I mean, I think folks mentioned it. I think diversification is one of the most important things. And I'll just say this, maybe to add to that. In the city of San Bernardino, we worked on a project called the People's Plan, and it was like this large scale surveying of all the community, more than what the city does for their general plan. Like, we surveyed thousands of people in the community ourselves as community members. And we asked people directly, like, what do you want to see in your community on all these, on education, on work, on the environment, et cetera. And a lot of, and I think it's going to be very specific to different communities. And so, at least for the city of San Bernardino, I know there has been a big emphasis on, like, how do we support, like, our small businesses, our food vendors to getting brick and mortars? How do we support the art community? Because there is a large art community here in San Bernardino. Like, how do we create more of these entrepreneurship programs? And I think it's going to be different for every city, every neighborhood sometimes, like what's important, but it's about engaging them directly and figuring out how does the city leverage what they're already passionate in and the cultures that they have, because that's the thing about the Inland Empire, is that every city and neighborhood is different. I mean, some communities they raise chickens and they have horses and they have rodeos and they're all about the equestrian lifestyle, and they have that programming. Like, how awesome would it be as if the city invested more, and so that we had more equestrian schools and we had more, like, they do like lassoing for the kids, and it's very specific to that. That's a community called Bloomington, but it's different for the city of San Bernardino. It's different for Colton. It's different for Fontana. It's different, right? And so that's what's important, I think, is about diversification that is informed by the people that live there, not by an industry that literally is only made in this community for other people that don't live here. And it's kind of connected maybe to the consumer question, kind of, in that, like, the Inland Empire is the people that buy the least off of Amazon, but we have the most Amazon warehouses anywhere in the country. Like, we are the ones that shop and consume the least, yet we are the ones that make it possible. So, not that it answers the consumer question, but just to say, like, we need more industry that's focused on us, right? Instead of supporting, I think, world trade.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. Celia, I see your question, and maybe we're going to wrap up at the end with that, but I want to get to Miriam's. Has there been any movement to create a national coalition among communities facing the same issue of exponential growth of warehousing? Do you all network? Is there connection there?
I can jump in real quick and plug them. The Moving Forward Network has been the hub for frontline freight communities for, I think, a really long time. And I think actually it started, I would say the origins of this national network started, I think, between the Inland Empire and LA starting to build a coalition amongst themselves here first. And then I think this was before my time, but they grew it out to then what it is now, which is, I think, has like a great infrastructure and stuff. But yeah, Moving Forward Network, I think, is how we connect. Like, I knew about moratoriums on warehouses because people in Chicago, Little Village, had done it there in Chicago, because Chicago also deals with the warehousing issue in rail. And so I talked to them directly. And in New Jersey, they have this EJ bill that's awesome that I know people are trying to replicate here in California. Like, that's the benefit I can call a person of that's like, that I know is also so dedicated that there's not a big turnover in this movement, I think, sometimes, because these are their neighborhoods. So you can call these people, and they're these lifelong relationships. But I don't know if there's another one maybe other people have.
Adrian or Sheheryard, do you have any other thing to add about other networks and communities?
No, just the Moving Forward Network. Yeah, it's a great network across the country.
So I want to get to April's question. This is about petitioning local government to approve green infrastructure requirements for new warehouse development. Is that helpful? I know Liz mentioned the solar thing. I know, I think solar in the state has been problematic. I know people who are trying to get that. All the companies seem to be not that dependable. I don't know if that's something that you all know about or want to respond to that question.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit, and be interested to get others, but on the one of the things that is complicated about it, I think getting local government requirements or planning requirements in the county plan, it's a good strategy and people are doing it. One of the problems is it's really hard until you can get them committed and advancing kind of fully zero emissions. And then the other kind of just reminder that I often do, I'm more of an air pollution person, but I work with communities that are fighting projects, not just because of air pollution. So for example, we're in court challenging a project that's going to destroy 100 homes for large scale warehousing. And so when you put warehousing near homes, it's not just the air pollution, it's the noise and other things. And generally the stuff that's in these laws to protect community aren't that protective. The noise stuff, a lot of times they allow heavy construction. I think it's post 7 a.m. and then, as late as 6 and even Saturdays. So, a lot of the stuff is not built and then decides you've got to get it in every city. So it is a hard, kind of strategy to pursue. Andrea and Liz and others have done that in getting these requirements. But I think a more regional or statewide approach may be actually a better approach because then it's just more efficient given the number of jurisdictions.
I wanted to add to that really quick. I know earlier I mentioned like that our community was able to have the Attorney General step in and essentially file a lawsuit against the city of Fontana. And I think one thing that's important to remember, because at the time I thought, oh great, the Attorney General, like he's the guy for California, he's going to come in and save. And really what I found out was that local government has a lot of power. And sometimes I wonder like if they even know how much power they have, or sometimes I think maybe they do know, but the result is that the result is the same, is that they don't use that power for the benefit of the community. They kind of use it for their own benefit or the benefit of the developer, because they could and should be requiring more, and for developers to do better in the cities that they infiltrate, and they don't. Most of them don't, and so we're pretty much left with a lot of disparities. And unfortunately there's loopholes, and I think that's something that has been part of the process of not being able to really get around this, is these loopholes. And but it all really starts back with local government, and if they're not pushing those guardrails, if they're not trying to really do what's best for the community and to protect them, then those opportunities to do better are just going to go, or are just going to be overlooked. And unfortunately, yeah, it does come back to local government, but they're just not really enforcing better regulations.
Thank you, Liz. I have a I see Dominique's question in the chat and also Celia's, and I'm wondering if there's a way to tie those two things together about what consumers can do, and are there examples of corporations that have been more amenable and more responsive to creating a better environment for workers in the warehouses, or are more sensitive to an EJ agenda?
I would say in terms of the workers' side, but I think it applies more broadly, is that it's the corporations that are being forced to do so. And in the context of workplaces, that means the workers have a union and are actually forcing their employer to change their practices. So UPS is the most obvious example. UPS very much does not like having a union, but they are, in a situation where they do, the biggest union contract in the country, and are compelled to, treat their workers somewhat better in certain conditions. And more importantly, the workers have strong legal protections and rights and contractual abilities to hold their employer accountable. The hope is that that can at some point go beyond just the working conditions of the workplace and also enter into, can we help transition this industry into, being sustainable, other impacts. So I think that's kind of the thing, is like all these companies are basically in a massive fight to the race to the bottom. They're always competing on cost to try to get the goods to you as cheaply as possible. Anything they do to raise costs will put them at a disadvantage, right? Bringing stuff in a truck, there's only so many ways to do that, and the only way to really compete on that is a cost. And so we have to really think about it as a system. And certain employers will be compelled to change their practices, but they're not going to do it out of the goodness of their heart. They're going to do it because they're pushed to do so. And also those companies that try to do that will also be at a disadvantage. So we have to really think about how do we raise standards across the board with things like the indirect source rule, warehouse, protection, those kinds of things that, raise standards, and then organize to, find as many places we can to change conditions inside.
Yeah, one thing I'll just make a plug for, I mean, in this region is, one of the things, even beyond what the warehouse rule does to reduce pollution, there was also just the information, because this is a largely underregulated industry, and so you don't have much information. So you see lots of press releases from a lot of these companies about their green programs and the efforts they're taking, but you don't get a lot of data on like kind of the day-to-day what they're doing. And so I think that's why these regulatory programs where they have to file reports, you have more of a sense of how many trucks are coming in and out, what they're doing to reduce that pollution, and just generally that type of information. Locations, I mean, sometimes it's even hard to determine what a building is. A lot of times when they build it, that was one of the things that I found shocking as I was going into it. A lot of times you won't even know necessarily what the warehouse will be doing. So you don't know what's going to be sold there or coming through there or happening. It's really kind of the Wild West as far as this development. So these regulatory structures help tame it a bit.
I wanted to add real quick to what consumers can do to kind of help. Basically, buy, small business, buy homemade stuff, or stuff that's made here in the U.S. Buy stuff that's, made by unions, or that has a higher quality, longer shelf life to it. No fast fashion. I know Patagonia is one of those companies that it's a bit more expensive, but the quality of the clothes, has a tendency to last longer. And I think if it even if it messes up or something, you can send it back and have it fixed. And to touch on the reports and data, like, it's unfortunate that there's so many studies that have to take place in order to get all this data and analysis. But I will say one thing is, it's really hard to put into words signs and symptoms. For example, a lot of the children here who are facing this terrible air pollution, they have nosebleeds, they have asthma, they have trouble breathing. Those are things that I think it's one thing to look at the scientific data and the reports and everything, but it's another thing to listen to a mom's concern about her children's health getting worse every single day. And that's the part that it's really hard to put emotion and feeling into numbers. And when I had the opportunity to go up to Sacramento to testify on Majority Leader Eloise Reyes's bill to essentially create a buffer of 1,000 feet between a warehouse development and a sensitive receptor, I tried to give, the word sensitive receptor some meaning, some emotion to it. It's me, it's people, it's our children. And for me, that's one of the reasons that I do what I do, because I'm out here trying to fight for my children's lives. When the California Air Resource Board, was doing their scoping plan, they put in there a section of public health, and it highlights the fact that children are still developing their system, their respiratory systems, and they have a faster heart rate, they have a faster respiratory rate than adults. So you put into perspective the fact that these children are not only barely developing their systems, but they're breathing in all this toxic air and increases their chances for cancer at a faster rate than your average adult. And let's not forget about COVID. COVID left a lot of survivors with a decreased lung capacity and decreased lung functions that are still having to inhale all of this pollution. So we have to come to a point and think that even though we're going to click on, Amazon and have that Prime shipping delivered to us, what is it really costing? It's costing frontline communities their own health. And unfortunately, some of these community members that have to work in these warehouses that are not getting health benefits are not even going to have the money or the ability to be able to pay for their own health expenses when they're showing signs and symptoms of respiratory failure, heart failure, diabetes. It all connects. And so I think one of the things that we as consumers can do is just be more conscious about what it is that we're buying and whether or not we really do need that. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you to all of our speakers for this really thought-provoking conversation, for the Liberty Hill staff and the EJ Circle who have created this space for us to begin learning about this topic that is so important and is often invisible because most of us live in Los Angeles. And I'm just thinking a lot right now across many different roles that I play, myself as an individual consumer, a family member who has friends and family who live in the Inland Empire, and as a business operator who has warehouses and mechanics who are in San Bernardino and thermal in the Inland Empire. So I continue to learn more. We'll have resources sent out after this, and also are planning to host a possible in-person tour of the Inland Empire. So if anyone is interested in continuing to learn about this topic, we'll send over that invitation very shortly. But a few other ways to be able to stay engaged with this group is if you continue to want to learn about Los Angeles and environmental justice, I'm going to share out the link to our donor circle so that you can join. It's a $250 minimum for Next Generation and $1,000 minimum for anyone else who is able to contribute that. And if you have any questions about the logistics of that, I'll also share my email address as well as that of my co-chair, John Christensen. And if people have time, we'll also just stay on here for another 15 minutes so that we can have casual conversation with our speakers. And I think if there are no logistic announcements, everyone is free to go. But want to again thank everyone, give everyone a big round of applause for being able to stay with us and learn and take the time.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you all.
Good to see everyone. Thanks for the great work.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You.
I joined the call late, but I was curious, who are the biggest warehouses, in terms of, I guess, I don't know if you'd say employees or square footage.
Amazon is the biggest since about 2019, 2020, and they doubled since, during the pandemic. So somewhere like a quarter to a third of the workers in warehousing in the Inland Empire are Amazon employees now. And then, just think of all the retailers, Walmart is second, et cetera.